So my name is Al Keeler. I've been a resident of West Windsor for 20 years now, 15 years on the Planning Commission. I'm chair of the Planning Commission. Other Planning Commission members that are here are Jill Attell, Mike Dudley, and Leah Masbano, who's been greeting you. Before we get started with our presentation, Wynn Johnson's going to say a few words.
You can say also where.
Oh, yes, we also have Windsor TV recording us today. So that's your manners.
Good morning. As Al said, I'm Wynn Johnson.
When?
I was a little surprised when Al asked me to make some opening comments. This is not a subject I know a lot about, but to be honest, I've thought about it a lot recently. It's hard to avoid thinking about it because everywhere you turn, you read an article about housing issues in Vermont. And so I started thinking about that, and that made me wonder what we plan to accomplish today. And I thought I'd make 3 comments, and I'll be brief. The first one is that this is not a hearing. I mean, we go to Planning Commission hearings often. That's the end of a process when the Planning Commission has a product, and we have an 11th hour opportunity to get an oar in and make a few comments or criticisms. This is not a hearing. This is the beginning of a process. A hearing happens at the end of a process. So we've been invited to, as I understand it, to join in the beginning of a process to discuss this issue of housing, affordable housing in West Windsor. Whether you're here because you know a lot about that, or whether you're here like me because you're interested in it, or whether you're here just because you're concerned about what the Planning Commission might do that's going to affect your tax rate. You're here for those are all the right reasons to be here, because this is the time to start being a part of this examination. And I'll talk a little bit more about close, and I'm not have a lot more to say. But the next thing I want to say is that I'm at least confused about this. You can't avoid reading about it. Population of Vermont's going up. No, it's not going up. It's staying steady. No, it's going down. There are lots more household formations. Well, what the hell is a household formation? I've never heard of it before. And if you're aging in place, the way Rita and I are, you're part of the problem. I'm confused, and I'm tempted to say I want more information. I want more numbers. I want a better explanation of what's going on, and I do in a way, but then I don't want to get buried in the weeds, because frankly, at least to me anyway, it seems pretty obvious that we have a problem. Mark Higgins wrote a really great open letter to the community. It was published in Front Porch Forum, which gives his perspective on this. We're aging. We have trouble getting volunteers. We have a school. When our daughter was in Albert Bridge 40 years ago, there were many more students then than there are now. We've got so few students in Albert Bridge, we may lose the school in a while. And frankly, I don't want that to happen. I've read about employers in the Upper Valley who are having trouble recruiting new people to join their businesses because they can't find housing. So it does seem to me that we have a problem. And this is the time to figure out if we can do anything about it. So that's the beginning. This is the beginning of a process, and I think what the Planning Commission hopes, and I certainly hope, I want to do it myself, I want to stay engaged because I want to see where this goes, and I want to learn more about it. And the Planning Commission is going to have a list someplace of for you to put your name and your email down if you want to get notices. It's when they're having meetings and when it's on their agenda, so that you can continue the participation. I mean, my perspective, in a way, to make a sort of a silly analogy, but I think an apt one, we're sort of a grape on our way to being a raisin. You know, and I don't want to be a raisin. I don't want West Windsor to be a raisin. I want to be a grape. So let's go for the grape. Let's keep involved. Let's try and figure this out because it'll be good for us, good for our kids, good for the future of this town. Thanks.
Thanks, Win. You covered a lot of the things that I'll be covering, so thank you very much for the heads up. As Win said, this is a journey that we're going on. The Planning Commission has taken on looking at affordable homes in West Windsor, and we've started a project, and the project includes engaging consultants who I'll introduce in a moment. And this is the first step, really, to expose the town to what we're trying to do, and then to get your input. So I'm the chair of the Planning Commission. Jill, who's the project leader on this, will be following me, making some comments. Brian, unfortunately, came down with COVID yesterday. He's from DeWolf Engineering. He was going to cover some site issues. Matt Giffen from Banwell Architects will be covering for Brian, as well as covering some issues around housing design. And then we end up with Jack Dugan, who will be talking about the financing, the creative and unusual financing we have for affordable housing. We'll have plenty of time for Q&A at the end. And after we're done, we'll hang around. The experts will be here if you want to have a chat with them. So we're going to ask you to hold your questions to the end. We passed out some pencils and papers, so hopefully if you have questions, jot them down. The presentation will be about 30 minutes. We're going to post the presentation on the website, the town website, so you'll be able to go back and look at it. We don't have all the answers. We won't have them today. We also think that we put some facts and figures on some graphs here, and we show the source for the information. They could be disputed one way or the other. The idea is to look at the big picture. So when you look at the graphs, just think of the big picture. So what do we mean by affordable? The basic benchmark is that something is affordable if you don't exceed 30% of household income. And so this chart illustrates how you can do some calculations for different income levels. Household income means all wage earners in a particular home or household. The first column is a series of levels of household income. The next column is 30% of that. Then we divide that by 12. So the third column is what the monthly affordable rent would be for people and or for supporting ownership of a home. And then the last column is for any particular income level in today's environment, what level of purchase price might you be able to support? So we're really focusing on what we're calling the missing middle. Those people that are seeking homes that cannot afford them today, those people that are nurses, teachers, and other folks like that. For instance, if you look at $100,000 that a nurse might be able to make at Mount Scotney Hospital at the high end of the salary level, he or she could afford $2,500 in monthly rent, or to support a mortgage and all the other things that go into owning a home, and could afford a $300,000 home. So let's go to the big picture, as Wynn pointed out. In Vermont, we have a decreasing housing supply. Those of us that are aging in place, we're not turning over our homes to younger families. We have a fairly significant, throughout the state, seasonal and secondary home ownership that takes away homes from full-time residents. The housing stock's getting older. We have a shortage of workers to build houses. And we also have things inherent in Act 250 and antiquated zoning rules that prohibit or slow down the creation of new homes.
Moving
So
on.
we have increasing demand. We have a decreasing supply and an increasing demand. We have a net in-migration into Vermont. We have workers that we're trying to hire at our hospitals and our schools that can't find homes, and therefore we can't hire them. And we have young people that we really would like to have in our town that are unable to find affordable homes. So the state of Vermont did a needs assessment last year and came up with these figures. 28,000 to 41,000 additional homes need to be built by 2030. That's 8,000 a year. And last year, 2024, only 2,700 were built. So we're falling behind as a state. There are legislative actions that were put in place last year. Act 250 was adjusted to make it a little bit more favorable for building. And the Homes Act was put in place to allow for greater density in our zoning. In our most recent zoning update last year, we passed in town here, adopted all of those. The legislature in 2025 is very much focused on this. We expect that there'll be additional adjustments to Act 250. There'll be more state funding for sewers and other infrastructure. The Regional Planning Commission around the state will have new responsibilities for helping towns target and then execute on increasing the housing stock. The Regional Planning Commissions did a study in 2022, and at that time they said West Windsor needed 67 new affordable homes by 2030. Yeah. So, as Wynn pointed out, we are an aging community. This is a rather dramatic slide that shows that the largest age cohort is 60 and over. Our median age in West Windsor is 56. For context, the state is 43. Also, we have to be concerned about the ongoing viability of our school. This graph shows the history of our K through 6 enrollment at Albert Bridge. It's bounced around quite a bit, but we really have a lot more capacity. In the old days, there used to be 100 to 120 students, and we have the capacity to handle that. And in a situation where there's going to be more consolidation, an underused facility is going to be a target. So, prices are also increasing dramatically. This slide shows the median sales price for homes that were sold in West Windsor from 2018 to 2024. There was a tripling to almost 600,000 last year for the median sales price. This is really interesting. Last year, there was the Between the Bridges study that was done. There was surveys that were conducted. And these are quotes from folks that responded to that survey. And it clearly shows that many people who now live in town look around and say, boy, if I was trying to move here now, there's no way that I could possibly find a house or afford a house. This is another interesting slide. And we did a fair amount of research. About 45% of our 800 homes in West Windsor are seasonal or second homes. Now, these folks add a lot to our community, but it also takes a lot of housing stock out of full-time residents. And then the graph shows the increase in short-term rentals, which is, again, quite shocking. From around 10 short-term rentals, it's jumped to over 40 in the last year. Again, taking housing stock out of the ability to house someone permanently. And our housing stock is old. The great majority of our homes were built in the 70s and 80s. There's only been a handful of homes built in the last 2 decades. Each year, maybe 4 or 5 housing permits are issued. So we have a very old stock of homes. I guess next. So, we're an aging community, low and flat enrollment in our school, increasing home prices, increased short-term rentals, and an old housing stock. So providing affordable homes, as Wynn said, is really very important to the viability of our community going forward. So I'll turn it over to Jill.
Great, thank you, Al. I may not ask you to advance my slides, but, so, hi, good morning. My name is Jill Appel. This is my 5th year in West Windsor. I moved up from West Concord, or Concord, Massachusetts, 5 years ago. And it turns out that Al and I, 40 years ago, worked in the same office of Arthur Anderson, Hartford, Connecticut. So I ran into him at the Rite Aid, and here I am. Before I left Concord, I spent a lot of time in, my background in general is finance and project management, but I spent a lot of time in community service, and I was on the finance committee, the municipal light board, and the sustainable energy committee. So I like this stuff. It's really important to me, and I'm happy to be here. I think probably this slide says it all. It's not a hearing, we're at the first step. We're in information gathering, we want to hear from you, and we know this is a long process. It takes a long time to build homes for people. But we're ready to get started. The approach itself is 5 major tasks. We can check off the first one today, but as Wynn said, we're hoping to just keep engaging people. We're accessible, we have monthly meetings, so please keep in touch. The second task is basically to work with our consultants to find some good locations in town, and you'll hear a little bit more about that in Matt's presentation. And Matt himself is helping us, will help us kind of envision housing options for these locations. Then we're going to whittle it all down to where's the real potential and how do we pull everything together to help move these projects forward. Finally, we're going to do a very slim financial report, and we'll be back to you in May and June to tell you a lot more, because we're going to know a lot more then. We've been at this about a month. These are our guiding principles so far. We've heard loud and clear that we can't add, we don't need any more taxes in this town. This project itself is grant funded, and our goal, when you hear from Jack, we're not developing this stuff. We're envisioning and planning and helping and supporting, but this is not a town expense. Small is beautiful. We all love this town. We don't envision big high rises, anything that would look out of place in this community. And one of the key things here is the town has spent a lot of time and money on putting in a water and sewer infrastructure. And that's a real advantage because then you don't have to spend site development to put in septic systems and wells. So we'll be focusing on the village and the mountain. I'm not sure how familiar you are with the zoning map, but the zoning map is right there. The top part of it, the light yellow, is rural residential. That's actually, we're not focused in that area. Although if somebody came up and said, I have 10 acres for you, we might consider it. But we're focused really down in the darker yellow, the gold area, and the pink and the purple. So you can feel free to take a look at that map afterward. One of the things that Al mentioned is with affordable homes and the modifications to the zoning regulations, you basically put homes on a smaller piece of land so that you can put more homes on the same piece of land so that you can leave more open space. You can leave that wildlife corridor. You don't have a single family home on a 4-acre lot and a whole row of single family homes on 4-acre lots. Flood hazard seems obvious, and energy efficiency is really important, not only for the environment, but also for the people who will live in those homes, because managing monthly utility costs is an important factor. And lastly, we support renovation. If we can get any of those old buildings to repurpose itself, we'll definitely consider that. And that's it for me, and I'll hand off to Matt Giffen.
Let me know if you want me to do your slide. Okay. All right.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Matt Giffen. I work for Banwell Architects. I've been at Banwell for about 10 years now, just over 10 years. Banwell itself has been around for almost 60 years, so I imagine a lot of you may have heard that name once or twice. Just a real quick background about myself. Went to school at Norwich University. I grew up in Vermont. I currently live in Lebanon, crossed over the dark side, don't judge. I previously worked in a few single-family residential architecture firms. I was a carpenter building residential homes for a short amount of time. But really, the last 10 years has been my passion working at Banwell. I, in particular, focus more on the affordable housing at Banwell. Banwell does a lot of schooling, commercial, et cetera. But I've really been leading the multifamily housing front at Banwell. So I'm very excited to be here and look forward to presenting the next couple of slides to you. So real quick, my role in this process, it's already been explained a few times, but this is a very high-level planning exercise. The end result here isn't for this team to build a building. We're developing a roadmap for someone else to come in and do that. We're just looking at some high-level ideas and just determining the viability of it. So far, Jill and I, we spent a couple weeks ago, we drove around for a couple of hours, driving around West Windsor, looking at what the existing building stock looks like. We're envisioning where things could potentially go. Really, we were just driving around, dreaming, getting an idea of what might be important for this town. On to the next slide. So what makes a good site? I'm sorry. Standing. Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I forgot Brian was first. Okay, so real quick. Yes. I was sorry about that. Okay, so our civil engineer, Brian, Al mentioned he is not here today. He was sick, so I'm filling in. I actually found out he wasn't going to be here about 30 minutes ago, so I'm completely unprepared to fill in for him, so bear with me as I get through this. So there's a lot of things that make a good site, and of course, this entire conversation is in the context of affordable housing, right? Just so keep that in the back of your mind. Minimize site development costs. There's a lot of different ways to do that. Avoid environmentally sensitive areas, wetlands, flood corridors, etc., as well as livability. We want people to be able to live in an area where it makes sense to them, walking, access to community features. And Jill, if you're picking up on anything that I'm missing, feel free to jump in.
You're good.
What makes a good site? Slide 2. Minimize site development costs. Flat to moderately sloping topography. A very steep site, tough to build on for a lot of different reasons. Tough to get a road to a steep site. Steep site oftentimes means ledge. Tough to put sewer. Flat to medium sloping sites are ideal for affordable housing. If it comes cleared, that's great. It costs a lot of money to clear land. There's a lot of permitting, et cetera, in place that requires to clear land. So driving around West Windsor, there's a lot of open fields. I'm looking around, looks great. Access to municipal utilities or land capacity. That's water and sewer, broadband access. Anything that's already in place that we don't have to pay for is less that we have to pay for. And then lastly, access to good roads. It's unbelievable how expensive it is to build roads. You can build roads cheaply that'll only last a couple of years. There's a right way and a wrong way to build roads. Having access to a good road already in existence saves a lot of money. Environmentally sensitive areas that we would like to avoid. A lot of you may recognize this satellite image here, but we've overlaid some floodplains and river corridors over here. You may drive around and think there's a couple of awesome sites, but it's in the flood zone, the 50-year, the 100-year. Unfortunately, these 100-year storms seem to be happening every 10 years now. We may have to think about reimagining that definition. But so unfortunately, a lot of these things that you see, a lot of these sites that you see just is not possible. We may not want to do it for obvious reasons, but a lot of the funding that we can access prevents it from happening in the first place. In addition to wetlands and streams and floodplains, high elevation areas, we like to try to avoid that. I'm not saying we're putting massive windmills up or anything, but we have a lot of beautiful sight lines around here, and we don't want to see a bunch of development showing up there. And there's a lot of other constructability issues that can happen when you build very high up in elevation. Livability, acceptable impact on existing residents, access to work, community and recreation, and walkability. That's a pretty self-explanatory slide. And hey everyone, I'm Matt. I got a little ahead of myself there. I've already made my introduction, so I will jump into the next slide. All right, so the missing middle. Missing middle refers to a wide range of housing options that falls between single-family detached homes and large apartment complexes. This essentially describes the gap in affordable housing that really encourages people of all economic levels and diverse family types. I talk a lot about density sometimes. Jill actually asked me to scale that back a little bit, so I'm just going to define density so we can keep this in mind as we move forward. Density is really the fundamental principle of affordable housing. More homes on less space is more economical. We do have some missing middle homes. You'll hear missing middle a few more times throughout this presentation. Those are the condos and the townhomes that tend to be up on the mountain. But for the most part, you look around, it's a lot of single-family homes on 10, 50, 100 acres plus. So again, that missing middle is what the focus is on this project. So what might these homes look like? Real quick, this is not a home right here. I think we all recognize this building, Scutney Outdoors. I'm showing this. Jill and I mentioned we drove around. We were like, oh, that's a great building. We'd love to see that. Ew, that's a gross building. Definitely not that. We drove up to see a Scutney Outdoors, and we thought this was a great example of something that would fit. You see exposed wood. You see appropriate scale. This isn't big. Clapboards. Actually, this one had more shingle style, I think. So this is just an example of a type of architecture that we could see. However, I can't tell you what these homes will look like at the moment. We don't have a site yet. There's a lot of things that influence what these homes could potentially look like. So the size of the site, how many homes can we fit on it? It may make sense to only put a duplex. It may be a large acreage and a large townhome could make sense. Context matters. Are we in the village? Are we up on the hillside? Are we hidden in the woods? Where it's physically located would influence the vernacular of this building. Neighbors. If we're proposing something that's adjacent to neighbors, we would want to reach out to you. We would want to talk to you to see what's appropriate. Your opinion matters and it counts. Zoning, building codes. I may have this grand idea, but I may be limited to what's actually possible given the law and the zoning. And lastly, soil orientation, site features, the actual physical condition of the site would certainly influence what this looks like. However, I don't want to leave it that vague. I do want to dig in a little bit more what this could look like. So again, going back to it depends on what the site can accommodate. We could see anything from a duplex, triplex, townhomes, maybe a small pocket neighborhood, mixed use, apartments, renovations. I'm going to go through a couple of slides to give you an example of what each one of these might look like. Again, please don't get kind of too caught up in some of these things. I'm going to show some examples from around the country. It may not necessarily be super appropriate to West Windsor. The idea is just to start imagining things on what could potentially be possible. So first on the list is a duplex. At the smallest scale, this is an example of a mid-density option. If the site allows, if it's a small site, you can't fit much on it, a duplex is great. So duplex, triplex, next up would be a townhome. We actually have some examples of townhomes in West Windsor already. The photo on the bottom is up on the mountain. The photo up top, designed by Haynes and Garthwaite. This is in Norwich, next to the pub up there. What I like about townhomes, and personally, again, without having a single site to look at and make a strong opinion on, I could see townhomes being very applicable to this potential project. Now, townhome versus apartment, the reason why I lean more towards townhomes, I think it has that more rural Vermont feel to it. Townhomes versus apartments, townhomes can accommodate a more diverse family size. You tend to see more 2-bedroom, 3-bedroom units in a townhome, whereas apartments tend to be a little bit smaller. And again, when we're trying to build affordably, the more homes we can put in a small area is the best way to achieve that. Next would be pocket neighborhood. So a couple of cool photos here. I think we can all maybe envision what a pocket neighborhood may or may not be. But the idea of a pocket neighborhood, what's shown here is a few single-family homes. It could be a couple of duplexes, it could be a few apartment styles. But what intrigues me about pocket neighborhoods, in addition to all the advantages I've already discussed, is the community aspect. I could see a young family of 4 with a couple of kids living in that first house, and maybe a senior couple living next to them, and a little bit of everything in between. I could envision some community gardens, a fireplace, a pavilion, playground, community center. West Windsor, we're very spread out. Although the community here is great. Quick side note, the turnout here, Jill told me she was expecting this. I didn't believe it. Jack and I earlier this morning were talking about how you see there's more people here than in towns quadruple your size. So I think it's amazing that this community came together for this. But something that's cool about pocket neighborhoods, I just barely squeaked into the millennial generation, but the millennials and the generations younger than me, it seems like we tend to gravitate more towards more people around us. And so I like the idea of a pocket neighborhood that could develop a smaller community within the larger community here. Here is a project by Union Studio. This is down in Rhode Island. This is an example of potentially mixed use. You look around West Windsor, there's not a lot of areas that would make sense for mixed use. The village here would likely be the only example. But what I like about mixed use, this is more of an apartment style where folks could live up on the upper levels or more in the rear of the building, but it would be an opportunity to bring some level of retail to downtown. This isn't a big booming metropolis. There's only probably a handful of commercial spaces that would make sense, but cafe, floral shop, tax prep, something like that could be intriguing to explore. But again, there's only a few areas where that could potentially be located. Apartments. Can't talk about affordable housing without apartments. This is a really cool project, again, by Union Studio. This is out in Michigan. I wanted to show this slide because it's possible for apartment buildings to be beautiful, to be intriguing. This in particular slide, in my opinion at least, this to me looks like a pocket neighborhood with apartments, beautiful gardens, and community space. Now, apartments would cater more towards the folks that couldn't afford to buy a house. Again, the slide that Al presented earlier, I'm sure some of you were looking down there, and even that 30%, it's like, wow, how could someone with that even afford that in the first place? Some people can't afford to build, or buy rather, and honestly, a lot of people don't want to buy at this stage. It's funny, the millennials and the younger generations, they just want to rent. They don't know where they're going to be in 5 years. And a lot of these folks don't actually have an interest in keeping up with a house. So it's important to pursue affordable rental options in addition to home ownership. And lastly, renovation. This one is a little bit harder to game plan for. It's very case-by-case basis. Not to be negative, but sometimes it is more affordable to demo the structure and rebuild. But looking around, there's a lot of beautiful aging buildings around here. It would be really fun to repurpose, revitalize the existing architecture. But again, it's a very case-by-case basis. Building codes, for example, in the older historic buildings, sometimes it's very cost prohibitive to manipulate that building to make it work for you. So that is the end of my presentation. I'm going to welcome Jack up to take over. Thank you, Jack.
Good morning, everybody. I'm going to, somebody take care of my hair. I'm going to stand to the side because that way I won't hurt my neck. I'm getting to the age and I'm trying to read things like that and I'm going to have to do this. And then if I turn around and look, my neck's going to get stiff, so I'm going to stand out to the side. So, background, I grew up in the Boston area, went to school in the Boston area. After I graduated, I went right into working for the state's Economic Development Office. Did that for about 10 years, and in 1990, we moved to Keene, New Hampshire, where I took over a regional economic development corporation called Monadnock Economic Development Corporation. And I worked there about 30 years until I retired a few years ago. While I was at Monadnock Economic Development Corporation, we made loans to small businesses to help them grow, but probably most of the work we did was in development. We built housing. We built corporate parks. We took downtown buildings and renovated them and repurposed them. Did all kinds of interesting things, from senior housing to hotels and so on and so forth. So it was a nice ride, but as I say, it ended a few years ago. And since then, I've done a little bit of consulting to help communities like this move forward on interesting projects that involve, again, either economic development, business development, or housing. My family, my daughter lives in Keene with her husband and my granddaughter. And as you'll probably notice as I go through my slides, I still retain a little bit of my Boston accent. And I'm making sure that my granddaughter carries on that tradition. When she says horse, I say it's a huss. When she says we're going in the car, I say, no, it's a car. So I'm doing the best I can, but it might be an uphill battle. Anyway, we'll see how we go. So one of the reasons, probably one of the most compelling reasons why there's a missing middle, is it costs a lot to build stuff. Here's a list of just some of the things that it takes to build a house or an apartment building. And land is included in this. Probably one of the more important site costs or cost to build that you'll find. But if you take a look at this and you add it all up, and this is based on two recent projects that I'm involved in Keene. Both are small mixed-use projects, so a little bit of commercial space. Is a new construction with 5-6 units of rental housing on the upper floors. We're seeing costs between $400 and $500 a foot, excluding land. So, is there any question why there's a missing middle? You can imagine that slide you saw earlier with the nurse at the hospital making $100,000 a year, which means she can afford a $300,000 home conventionally. It's a big gap between, for example, a moderately sized home on land for $700,000 or $800,000 and the $300,000 that nurse can afford. So there are ways that we could move forward to help maybe bring that number down a little bit, reduce the costs of the construction. And you can see them here. One ideal way to bring down the cost significantly is to find free land or very inexpensive land. The other, of course, is site work, and I know Matt touched on this. It's to try to find a site that minimizes the amount of work necessary and allows you to go ahead and build something. And then there are a number of ways under construction. Build smaller, build more, in closer proximity to each other. And you can obviously read this and see, but even if you do all this, there is still an affordability gap. It's not going to bring that house from $700,000 or $800,000 down to $300,000 or less, which is what we're trying to do. We can get free land, but we have to come up with creative structures, creative development and ownership structures to move these projects forward. I know I'll touch briefly on financing on the next slide, but it wasn't uncommon at Monadnock Economic Development for the not-for-profit to create partnerships that involved for-profit entities. The reason being, not-for-profit is eligible for grant funding. For-profit entities have a need for tax credits, or they can provide equity to a project. So it gets very complicated, but good things are worth trying to be inventive for. I mean, you need to be very creative on the ownership structure. You have, I'm sure, people in this area who could participate in those type of ownership or development structures. Housing trusts, housing authorities, again, nonprofit corporations partnering with for-profit corporations to get the best funding sources available into a project. And of course, there's always private donations and equity. I know, again, we were very fortunate in the Keene area that we had families in the area that that wanted to preserve Keene or some small towns around Keene and stepped up, put their money where their mouth was, stepped up and invested money, not only in the projects we were involved in, but also in projects related to quality of life issues, like a library expansion, a new skating rink, and so on and so forth. So the key takeaways here are you have to be creative on how you set up a structure for both ownership and the development structure to move these projects forward. The financing is very project specific. It wasn't uncommon for us, even on a relatively small project, to combine 8, 9, 10 different funding sources to get the best deal possible to allow a project to move forward. And cobbling those financial sources of funding is, it's an interesting process. You need to have a background on what's available. You need to be able to get those folks all in the room at the same time. You need to sell them on the idea that they should participate and invest in your project. And you need them to also think creatively. Community development block grant can be used for a lot of things that people don't typically think you can use it for. For example, public works, affordable housing. And again, you need to source these projects, and you need to make sure that they understand that you're supportive of those projects, because all of these funding sources will look to the community to make sure that there's community support moving forward. An experienced team is the most important thing if you want to keep this in the realm of not-for-profit / for-profit developers. And I think the resources for that experienced team and the resources to put the funding together is available to you when and if you allow or elect to move forward on this project.
Thanks. So we've taken a little bit more than a half hour. So this last slide is just a quote from Phil Scott's budget address, and I think it says it all. We need to support affordable homes here in West Windsor and in Vermont. So with that, we'll open it up for questions. Hopefully we have some. Yes, Maggie.
So, I'm Maggie Monroe Castle. I live on Cemetery Road, and I hate to admit it to this group, but I have a history of working in affordable housing, and I love everything that you're saying. Everything is perfect, and if I had 10 acres, I'd give you 5, but I only have 5. They already chopped up Harry Hiltz's property long ago, but my question is particularly related to Jack's part of the conversation. I understand all the sources, I understand all that stuff. I also understand those sources often come with sort of a built-in way to keep those homes affordable into the future. So given all that we've heard today, we could build 20 units, and without those requirements to keep things in the affordable market, in 5 years, we could be back, in 1 year, we could be back to where we are. Also, if we're looking to gain a younger population, and unfortunately, my younger daughter just moved out of West Windsor, so we lost part of that. When it comes time for selling these properties, how is that constrained? How do we, this sounds terrible, but how do we keep, our friends who love it, that we live in Vermont and they want to live here, and now I can get a house for $250,000, and I'm going to retire from my job and I'm going to move and age in place in Vermont. How do we keep that, keep it affordable into the future and actually sell the homes or rent the homes to people who we're trying to add to the community?
Shared equity.
Those are all really good comments and questions, Maggie, and I think There's examples of how that's been done in many other places. We saw some beautiful renditions of pocket neighborhoods. And in a way, and again, this is, I don't want to get too specific now because we don't know what the site's going to be like or how many homes are going to get built. But there are examples where, for example, a housing trust owns the land. So when you sell a house in that development, the people who are buying the house, not the land. There are deed restrictions put with the land that, again, depending on the project, and I don't want to get too specific, but I'll give you examples. One example is that there's a deed restriction that the housing trust that developed the site may be in partnership with a for-profit private developer, has the ability, maybe first right of refusal, to buy the home back when it's going on the market. Coupled with that is usually a mechanism, again, through the deed to the property, that the developer can claw back most of any equity that's been created in the project. So in other words, you don't want to sell a $700,000 house for $300,000 and just walk away, and the very next day, people say, this is great, I'm going to put it on the market for $700,000. So you put a cap on how much those folks can take out of the property when they sell it. They may get their down payment back. They may get a portion of the appreciated value, but the vast bulk of any money they realize from the sale would actually go back to the housing trust to help keep the development affordable and or expand the development and build new homes over time to accommodate the need for affordable housing. Did that help?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it's,
I understand.
yeah, and the same thing is if you build rental properties, there's ways to restrict that too, but many of these funding sources that would be brought to bear, we had a slide that talked about there's some strings attached. Some of the attached strings are if you use affordable housing tax credits, for example. That property that is funded partially with those tax credits has to remain affordable rents for at least 30 years. So there are ways to put a cap on it and maintain that affordability.
And are there ways, I know there are ways, I don't know if there could be ways here to set aside, 2 or 3 units out of 20 that would be available for application by people who live or work within, 10 miles of here. I don't know, I'm making that up. But,
Yeah.
Like hospitals invest in, sometimes in workforce development, housing.
Yes, there is ways to do that. There's ways you can be very creative. I mean, there's ways that you could ensure that a certain number of units are available for people from certain financial backgrounds. In other words, veterans, seniors. Anyway, you have a great deal of flexibility to set those units aside.
Yes.
Would those same types of mechanisms that you just talked about apply to trying to increase the ratio of permanent residents?
They would have to be permanent.
I was just saying with those same restrictions or mechanisms you were just talking about apply to
They have to be permanent.
increasing the ratio of permanent residents to second homeowners, because if we have a lot of affordable housing and it gets bought up by
Yeah,
vacationers, who we love,
you can't.
but we're trying to build more community, people living here permanently.
Yeah, you don't have to walk. I can yell. You have a great deal of flexibility. What most communities do, or most not-for-profit developers do, because it's a requirement of a lot of the funding sources, these have to be owner-occupied residents. So you're not building these things so speculators can come in and then try to lease them out at high rents. It's owner-occupied.
Just have a couple comments on the financing part. I know many places do that, including Dartmouth College. They have that sort of system for their, I think, higher level professor types. They sell them a house and then they turn it over and they can only make X dollars.
Yes.
So that's been a long time. And it's obvious to me, and I don't know about you that have all looked at this, but it seems like we have an affordable housing at the moment, still up at the mountain. I look at real estate quite a bit. It's not the $89,000 it was a few years back, but it still is under 300. Is there a way legally to, you're talking about permanent residents, to make some sort of tax credit or deal with people that do turn those places over, that they turn them over to year-round people? They do this for like recreational zoning up in Hanover. You can only be there X months. So there's precedent, I think, to making sure those people aren't going to be Okemo skiers that come in. They're going to be people that work and live there, which I have several that I work with at the hospital that live up there. So when it turns over, the seller can get some sort of deal
You can
to
convert,
keep it that
put
way.
it owned by somebody
Don't
else.
know.
Yeah.
You want me, yeah.
Well, do you want?
Thank you. Again, very good comments. I was aware that Dartmouth College is in a lot of real estate. I have not, the funding, and maybe you have to let me know whether I'm answering your question or not. I'm not aware of a program that would give tax credits, for example, to the developers of the ski area to ensure that the homes are long-term rentals are permanently owned by.
Most of these are permanent. I mean, these people have owned their places for, they're just selling them. Is there a way to legally have them sell it to people that are going to live there?
They're,
With some sort of incentive, obviously, you're going to need that.
I think a lot of the funding programs that can be brought to bear with the types of projects that we're talking about don't necessarily have to pay for new construction. You can buy existing properties. And if that was an alternative,
I mean, it's already up there, it's done, it's on our town water and sewer. You've seen the village, it's all in the river corridor now. There's very limited development.
and again, the programs are available to buy those properties to make them permanently affordable.
Look at the age of the buildings.
They're going to be available continually because they're getting X'd out at an hourly rate.
Well, it would be owned, so they have to be sold to an entity that's willing to take over the ownership and the administration of those properties and use the funding sources available to them to make sure that those properties stay affordable in the long term.
So you need someone like Twin Pines to come in and manage that rather than the town?
Yeah, a housing trust or or an economic development group or whatever.
We are right on the border of Twin Pines area that they're covering. The West Windsor Housing Trust is based in Brattleboro, and it comes up to Windsor. We're right on the border. So we've had conversations with Twin Pines, and so there's lots of different creative ways that these things can be done.
It seems those places, turn it over now.
Hi. My question is less financial and more development. And you probably can't answer this right now, but when I look at the secondary, the deep orange, that secondary development zone, there's no sewers, there's individual septics, and I'm wondering, I want to see more affordable housing in town. I think there are some pockets in there, or even some roadside, that could be developed. But my question is how you do that with individual septics and no sewers.
So shared septic.
Yep. Yeah, so great question. So if Brian, the civil engineer, was here, he would have a much more detailed response to this. But it really comes down to the creativity of what you can do. So just as a random example, and again, Brian would be able to provide more factual information on this, but there's a threshold where once you're over so many units or bedrooms on a site, it kicks you into a much more expensive industrial sewer treatment requirement. So in the situation where you're talking about, where it's kind of like, off the grid, if you will, it's not connected to water or sewer, if you keep it to a smaller, 8 to 10 apartment or room type spot, you can keep it more in a residential scale style well or sewer. So it actually is more affordable to build smaller in a situation like that. But again, it really comes down to a case-by-case basis. Like if someone came out and was able to donate land, but the actual ability to build it was more difficult, the offset of not having to pay for the land could then pay for a more complicated construction type. I'm not sure if I'm really answering your question.
I don't necessarily expect a response, but I think that for our zone, our zoning?
Yeah. Yeah.
Planning board, I think that's something to really kind of frequently asked questions, right? How do you deal with land that is currently just for septic? Do you build sewer? I mean, are we looking at potentially a short sewer line going in there? Are we talking about a larger septic system that can feed 8 small houses? That's just the kind of frequently asked question
Yep.
that I think it would be good to have a response.
Good.
Yep.
Yes.
And part of what we asked the civil engineer to do is analyze some random sites that we picked that may or may not be applicable. Just as part of getting this planning exercise, so it very much is a case-by-case basis. But the best situation is to actually identify a site, so then we can actually look at that site and come up with it. So if anyone has any ideas for sites, I hope this is the right thing to say, but let Jill know, and then it can go onto our list, and then we can start to do a very high-level analysis of it. So again, kind of secretly, what we're hoping out of all this is some of you guys come to us with some really good ideas or some good locations to look at that we wouldn't have been able to think of.
I just had one comment and one question. My comment is, in the list of reasons why West Windsor doesn't have enough housing opportunities, there was one big one missing, in that houses with a lot of land were bought and deserted. There's many properties in Brownsville that are sadly, just being ruined, and there's a lot of land, and I didn't see that on the list of things. That's not someone who lives somewhere else and comes visits and buys things here. That's not someone who rents it out. That's just deserted land. And my question is, I think I'm missing the end result. Like, I want a quick best case scenario. Who's building the houses? Who's paying for it? And how does it end up happening? I guess I'm just not understanding. This is the basic, trying to make it happen, but I want the next step.
Well, I mean, so
We're gonna,
you want to do that? It's okay.
well,
You go ahead.
I think the answer is that we would have to engage one of these housing trusts,
Yeah.
Twin Pines and/or Wyndham Windsor, that can put together a development team, not the town, but Twin Pines, say. And they would acquire the property, do the testing. If it doesn't have sewer and water, probably doing the testing to make sure that the property could handle the sewer, the septic, and as well as available, and then develop it. And in doing so, they're not for profits. In particular, if somebody donated land, it would be tax advantages to that person donating. And then the grants and the credits that the not-for-profit trust can generate can be used to reduce the cost of the construction. And then you would have these covenants associated with it, if it's a pocket neighborhood, for instance. But Twin Pines also does small, in Woodstock, they're doing a single home, and they're also doing a group of 4 or 5 right across from the high school. So freestanding individual homes. Now those are on sewers, but if we're not in a village or on the mountain, we would have to look at septic. And there's certainly good opportunities in the secondary growth in the orange area. There are properties that would fit pocket neighborhood the structures.
Al, what did you say?
So the only thing I would add is that when it really, we met with the folks from Twin Pines on Tuesday, and I'm like, oh my God, these people do everything. It's wonderful. So you're inspired to kind of do the handoff, but I don't want you to get the idea that we're doing the handoff, which just means, oh, like here at Twin Pines, you take this and you just, I mean, I think we want input to design. We want to work closely with whoever is working with us. They just have, there's so many advantages in terms of their access to, they know where the money is, they know how to access it. And they actually hire Banwell architects for actually a lot of their projects so that we can envision what these things look like. And so when we envision this, it's really pockets of homes, you know, some things on the mountain that, you know, give us maybe apartment capacity, some pocket neighborhoods out in secondary growth, whatever we can do in the village and stay out of the floodplain, but kind of small here and, you know, here and there. So that's the thing. It's not a pure handoff. The other thing is they're so used to administering. They have one development, one pocket neighborhood they developed in Norwich, I think it was 30 years ago, but 42 units, and they parceled it out, and they said, all right, 30 are gonna be this requirement, 10 are gonna be this requirement, we're gonna reserve 5 for seniors, we have 4 units for veterans. And I met a veteran at the post office the other day who actually just bought a condo on the mountain, and I was delighted to meet him. So they're so far down the pike on this, it's just wonderful. They're so capable. So you want to partner with them, but it's not a handoff, I guess is the point I'd like to make.
And I'll just jump in just with one last thing. So, what was it, 2 months ago, Banwell, Jack, and Brian from DeWolf, we came in and we interviewed to be a part of this team. And I actually asked Jill during the interview, I'm like, why are you interviewing us and not a developer? And she's like, we're not trying to develop properties at the moment. We just want to understand what it would take. We want to see where it would be possible. There was a study that was done, and I'm drawing a blank on it, but I outlined X amount of affordable homes that was needed to achieve X, Y, and Z. So it's like, okay, we've been told what we need to do, but now how do we do it? We don't want to do it yet. We're not ready to do it. We're not developers, but like, how would we do that? And so that's the purpose of this study. And one advantage of this study is we are able to reach out to these communities, community members, and start getting ideas, and the ability for us to find possibilities is greater than what a developer could do. So the goal is to get some ideas. Hopefully there's a handful of 10 properties that would be viable. We will do our due diligence on making sure that it's cost effective, it's physically possible, you know, yada, yada, yada. And then once we have this information, then we could potentially reach out to some developers and say, hey, we've done this legwork for you. You don't need to get the community on board. We've already reached out to them. We've got enough people here ready to support this. We've got these 10 properties for you to look at. Don't know if you can develop it. It may not make financial sense, but I can tell you that it's out of the floodplain. It's meeting these needs. So some developers, they don't have that bandwidth to be able to get into that granular level. They like to look at the Lebanons and the Hanovers and the White Rivers where that need is obvious. Everything's on water and sewer. It's a little bit more intimidating for those developers to come into these rural communities. It's just a lot more work for smaller amount of work, right? So I think the purpose of this is to understand what's possible, and then when the community is ready to take it to the next level, it's going to be a lot easier to make that transition.
I just have a couple of comments that I wanted to make. I don't really need or expect answers, just wanted to put a few things out there. I wanted to reiterate what I think is the importance of cutting down on or reducing the number of existing homes and condos and so forth, and preventing new ones from being turned into second homes and Airbnbs. I crunched some numbers a while ago, and I don't have the numbers in front of me, but the short version is the census records, obviously the number of people, but also the number of housing units in states and smaller census districts. If you look at the numbers from 1990 and compare them to the numbers from either the 2020 census or the 2022 American Community Survey, in today, there are more housing units per person than there were in 1990. We have more housing per person than we did 35 years ago, even if you adjust for smaller family sizes. There is more housing units per person. So there is obviously an issue of how those housing units are being utilized. So I think we really do need to pay attention to making sure that they are being used by permanent residents. The second thing I want to say is I'd really like the focus to be on infill and building in the village, the pink and the purple areas on that map, not even the dark orange. I really don't want to see a random 10-house development 2 miles up the road, Like, if you took the Sykes building over there and copy-pasted it right next door into the driveway, like, there's 4 units of rental. Obviously not saying that specific thing is possible, but that's the sort of thing that I think is best. Concentrate the development to the developed village area and have a nice, relatively high density village, and then a very rural farm, fields, forest exterior. I don't want to see, houses every quarter mile, every, couple hundred yards on the side of the road. I don't think that's West Windsor. So I'd really like to see the focus be on downtown and the mountain.
Thank you. Clearly, the new zoning bylaws reflect what you just said in terms of encouraging density in the village and on the mountain. And, that's where the acreage requirement is the least. This fellow back here.
So I just wanted to share just a quick thing for everybody. It comes across as it's a Vermont issue or a West Windsor issue. This issue is systemic nationwide. We heard a number about $500 per square foot. There's some parts of the country it's pushing $2,000 per square foot. I've been doing this work for the last 5 years, trying to start a modular housing manufacturer. It's not about me. It's about a problem that's so large and so overwhelming that it's almost impossible to solve. When my kids went to Albert Bridge, now they're young adults. They have all gotten good jobs. They can't buy houses in this town, right? So when we think about affordable housing, historically it was viewed as, oh, people don't have enough money, or they don't have a job, or whatever it is. What we're talking about is members of our community can't relocate here and raise their families, right? So that's why we're seeing the numbers that we're seeing. The second part that's really important, there's a demographic element to this. As a certain part of the community ages, that community, that number, is about 55 to 65 million people nationwide. The millennials and the sub-generations under that are another 55 to 60 million people. So we need more housing because we have more people who are living longer. So part of the issue that we have, and I would like everybody to go back in your memory banks, right? Where was the largest population increase for Vermont? It was in the 60s. And that was because Vermont had extreme freedom for new concepts of living to take place. Some people might call it hippies, some people might call it communes, some people might call or whatever it was. But the reality of it is that the culture that existed, right? Heavy Republican state, very aggregate, very agriculturally based, and incredibly cheap land, right? You can watch old historical videos, 50-acre farms going for $5,000, 10 people paid $500 each, they bought a property, they built a shed, and they lived in a commune, right? We can romanticize that today, and I'm not taking any work away from any of the hard work that's been done by our town. But the reality is we have a 140-page document of zoning regulations that prevent any of that behavior from taking place. At all, right? And so it's not necessarily blaming zoning, it's not being, but there's a relationship that exists, right? We all get our tax bill. I freaked out personally, right? And I freaked out personally because I have a piece of property that is an eyesore to the town. It is a behemoth, right? It was an old commercial property that had to become residential because it couldn't support commercial activity due to regulations. So I'm speaking from my own experience, right? What we as a community, as a group, should focus on is not finding more obscure financial mechanisms to find how things can be affordable. We should figure out how to create an environment so we can have and accept more alternatives to that environment so that people can live, right? A very fundamental thing that takes place in the rest of the country, is to give you a sense. Minimum square footage for a building. So if you're in Palo Alto, California, and they say you need 1,000 square feet, and it's 2,000 to 100 square foot, your starter home is $2 million. That's how the math works, right? And so what we have is, we have an environment where you have capable young people who want to live here. You have a greater enthusiasm for do-it-yourself. You have a greater enthusiasm for lots of skills, attributes, but the people don't even have the time to do that work themselves because they have to get a job doing something else in order to be able to have enough money to be able to live in the environment, right? So when we think about it, it's not a problem that can be solved with, oh, just change this, change that, right? And I'm gonna just be quiet now, right? I want to show the community, my neighbors, my friends, that this problem isn't just here. It's the whole country. The majority of the reason, I'm gonna just go out on a limb here, but it's not unfactual. The building materials are marked up a tremendous amount by non-revenue producing, right? So distribution. And we're seeing an exponential rate in the fall of labor. So the Chicken Little in me that's telling you about the negative that's coming, when you look at the construction site, most of the people, when I was a young man, were young people. But everybody on the construction site is like my age. And there's very few young people working on the construction site, right? And so those young people, there's so few, right? So what I used to say is there would be 5 or 6 people working on the job. There'd be one older person, and then everybody else is younger. Today, it's all older people and one young person. So the reality is that in 10 years, those individuals, including myself, age out. Where's the labor? So when you sit and you think, oh, I got to get a plumber, and it's $120 an hour. I got to get an electrician, $160 an hour. That's the canary in the coal mine right now. In 15 years, that's going to be $250 per hour. So I'm just giving you that perspective that there are lots of people trying to solve this problem. No one else from outside of the world is going to solve it. It's really challenging, but you have to know how large of a problem it actually is. Thank you.
Thanks, David. Other questions? Martha? Martha, you're supposed to give us answers, not questions.
I was just wondering about the status of the sewer feasibility study done a couple of years ago to expand the sewer up Seams Road and over to Skyhawk.
Turn this over to our chair of our select board.
I came down to not talk, so thanks for the question, Martha. And I actually wear the hat as the sewer commissioner, which is a separate hat from the select board hat. We did conduct a feasibility study for both Seams Road and Skyhawk, I want to say within the last 18 months. The Utility Advisory Committee reviewed the results of it, and the ratepayer representatives on it sort of pushed to not be funding the expansion. So while we did identify what seemed to be an economically efficient way of expanding sewer up both Seams Road, Skyhawk to a lesser extent, just because of some topographical issues, the actual moving forward on the project is at a pause just because the ratepayers were unwilling to pay it, and we didn't want to push the expense onto the town side. It's obviously a project we can always revisit with the work we've done, but as it was conceived, we're not going to be moving forward until, there's a bigger mandate from a group that's can fund it, whether it be the taxpayers, the ratepayers, or some outside source.
But that's where the legislature is hopefully going to put more money into grants for septic and for sewers and other.
I saw in the slides today, first off, let me say I'm certainly not opposed to sustainable, affordable housing. That's something we should all be striving for. But I saw several times in the slides today and in other people's comments, not necessarily here at this meeting, that building more houses is going to lower taxes in town. And I have a very long history involved with the taxes in this town. And I can tell you from personal experience and from my life of living in this town, that building more properties, more housing units, does not directly lower your taxes. Because there are always, there's a short-term bump in the grand list, which gives you a short-term reduction in your municipal rate, not your school rate. And you don't bank on it, folks. That's all I can tell you. It's much more complex than that. And the other comment that I want to throw out is, it was suggested in the slides that by encouraging more families to move to town, potentially increasing the enrollment at Albert Bridge, that we might be able to save the school. That ship sailed. I'm sorry. If any of the plans that the governor has on the table right now, that ship has sailed.
Yeah.
I'm sorry because I missed the first part of this. Is there a number? Is there a number of affordable housing units that is a target?
Yeah.
And I would just echo, and I may get run out of town on a rail, but I think that, saving Albert Bridge School is something we all have to look at carefully and in the harsh light of day. There's using the nurse example who needs that $300,000. I think that's a great example, but how valuable is it to her to get into a wonderful home that she can be in, even knowing that suppressing the resale value of that home will not do anything for her estate, just saying that. you know, if the school taxes keep going up and up and up and up, that's not gonna help anybody. But I guess my question is there a number? Is there a number of homes we're looking at?
There is a number. We're working on finding that number, but so there's a target now for the region that West Windsor is in. So there's a 10-town region surrounding this area. We need between 1,200 to 1,700 new units in the region by 2030. A previous study a couple of years ago estimated that West Windsor needed 67 units. So it might be in that ballpark.
Oh, like we had. And Jason is the lead at our regional planning commission now, Muscatine Regional Commission.
I may anger Wynn, but that won't be the first time. I'm a graduate of Albert Bridge, and at a time when there were 110 students. It was probably 25 years ago that I graduated. I aged well. I think the future, it's a gift to the Magi problem. We bring in more kids, we need more school, but I don't think that's going to happen. I think we need to regionalize the little school, and it's just way too expensive for way too few students at this time. And I think that the availability of the school would be a perfect setting for a mixed community of low-income housing.